The call came in at 8:14 on a Thursday morning, 11 days before my sister Britta's wedding. I was in the middle of routing a materials order for a project in Duluth when my phone lit up on the desk beside my keyboard. My mother's name. I let it ring twice before I picked up, because I knew from the time of day that it wasn't going to be a short conversation. "Your father wants you to handle the venue coordination," she said. "No hello. Britta has too much going on, and the woman at the Halvorsen hasn't been responding to his emails." The Halvorsen was a restored lodge outside of Brainerd, Minnesota, about 2.5 hours south of where I lived in Duluth. I had been there once, for a cousin's graduation party, 7 years ago. I remembered the long gravel entrance road, the smell of pine and old wood, the way the main hall caught the afternoon light through a bank of west-facing windows. "What does coordination mean, exactly?" I said, calling them back. "Confirming the catering head count, making sure the table linens are the right color." She paused. "You know, the details." "Does Britta know he's asking me?" "She knows someone's handling it," my mother said. "She's got the dress fitting and the rehearsal dinner seating to sort out. She doesn't need one more thing." I understood what that meant. I wrote down the venue contact name on the back of an invoice envelope. "When does he need an answer by?" "He already gave them your number," she said. "They'll call you this afternoon." I set the envelope on top of my keyboard and looked at it for a moment. "Okay," I said. She had already moved on to something else before I answered. I could hear her walking, the sound of a cabinet closing. "Britta's so relieved," she said, as if that settled it. The venue coordinator, a woman named Linda, called at 2:40 that afternoon. The catering head count had a discrepancy. The Brandt family had sent 3 RSVPs after the cutoff, and the caterer needed a final number by Friday. The table linen color that Britta had selected, a pale gold my mother kept calling champagne, had a 12-day lead time, and the order hadn't been placed. The rehearsal dinner seating chart was missing 6 names. I worked through it in about 90 minutes, made 4 phone calls, confirmed the linen order, and sent Linda a corrected headcount spreadsheet by 4:15. Linda thanked me and said she wished all her vendor contacts were this easy to reach. I didn't tell anyone I'd done it. I opened the desk drawer, pulled out the thin spiral notebook I kept beside the project binders, and wrote down the date, the task, and the time spent, 11 hours, total, across the coordination work I'd already done that week for the venue. I wrote it the way I wrote everything: date, description, amount. It was habit, the same way tracking a change order was habit. My supervisor at Lindqvist had told me in my first year that the only things that exist in this business are the things you can document. I had believed him, and I had kept believing him long after the habit had spread beyond the office. I closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. My name is Nora Kessler. I was 34 years old the summer of Britta's wedding. I worked as a project coordinator for a regional construction firm based in Duluth, Lindqvist and Sons, though there hadn't been a son involved in the company's operations in over a decade. My job was to keep subcontractors on schedule, track materials delivery, manage change orders, and make sure that the people on a job site had what they needed before they knew they needed it. I had been doing it for 8 years. I was good at it. My father, Gerald Kessler, was a semi-retired civil engineer who had spent 30 years with the County Road Authority in Brainerd before stepping back at 62. He was respected in the way that men who have spent decades in a room full of other men tend to be respected, confidently, without much examination. He believed that competence announced itself, that people who were truly capable made their abilities known without being asked. He had said this to me directly, more than once, usually in the context of explaining why he hadn't promoted a particular employee. He had never learned to credit what was offered without being asked, because in his experience, the things that mattered most had always been declared. He had never said it about Britta. Britta was 29, a dental hygienist in St. Cloud, engaged to a man named Marcus whose parents owned a hardware distribution business in the Twin Cities. She was the younger one, the one who had stayed within a comfortable radius of home, the one whose life looked, from the outside, like a set of sensible decisions made in the right order. My father admired her the way he admired infrastructure, quietly, completely, as if her existence required no explanation. I had moved to Duluth after college. This had been, in my father's accounting, a form of abandonment dressed up as ambition. He had never said so directly. He didn't need to. It lived in the slight delay before he answered questions about my work, in the way he explained my job to his friends as logistics, something like that, in the absence of my name from conversations where it should have appeared. My grandfather, Einar Halvorsen, was my mother's father. He was 78 and lived alone in a house on the edge of Pequot Lakes, 40 minutes from Brainerd, in a place where the tree line came right up to the back of the property, and in winter you could hear the lake ice shift at night from the spare bedroom. He had worked as a land surveyor for most of his adult life. He had a reputation for being precise about things that other people found it easier to approximate. He called me on my birthday every year without fail, always at 7 o'clock in the morning, always starting with the same line. Well, another one. He was the only person in my family who ever asked what I was working on. About 2 years before the wedding, he had called me on a Sunday afternoon and asked, without preamble, whether I kept any kind of record of the things I did for the family. Not for work, for the family. I had told him yes, the notebook, the dates, the amounts, the hours. He had asked me to read him some of the entries. I had read him 6. He listened without interrupting, and I could hear him on the other end of the line the way you can hear someone paying careful attention. No shuffling, no background noise, just the particular quality of a silence that is actively receiving information. At the end he said only, "Good. Keep doing that." I didn't ask why. With Einar, you didn't always need to know why something mattered. You just needed to trust that it did, and wait. The first time I stepped in on Britta's behalf without being asked, it was 6 weeks before the wedding, on a Tuesday evening in early June. I was at my desk in Duluth finishing notes from a site visit in Superior when I got a forwarded email from my mother. No message in the body, just the forward, the way she forwarded things when she wanted me to know about a problem without having to be the one asking me to solve it. The original was from the Halvorsen's events manager, flagging that the outdoor ceremony permit required a county noise variance for the string quartet Britta had booked, and that the application window closed in 4 business days. Britta hadn't filed anything. The permit office closed at 4:30. I looked at the clock. It was 6:18 in the evening. I found the county events office website, downloaded the variance application, filled it out using the venue's address and Britta's booking confirmation number, and drafted a cover letter explaining the nature of the event. The next morning I drove to the FedEx location on Superior Street before work and overnight the packet to the Crow Wing County Permit Office with a return receipt request. The fee was $60. I put it on my personal card. 2 weeks later, a confirmation notice came to the address I had listed, mine, because I was the one who would be monitoring for it. I took a photo of it and texted it to my mother with a note that said, "Permit confirmed. All clear for the quartet." She replied, "Oh, wonderful. Britta will be so happy." No one asked who had filed it. I added the entry to the notebook, the way I always did. County noise variance, Crow Wing County Permit Office, $60, 2 hours, confirmed by return receipt. 3 weeks after that, with the wedding 12 days out, the florist called my mother to say the centerpiece design Britta had chosen required a flower variety, a specific pale peony, the Shirley Temple variety, that had a regional availability problem. The supplier in Minneapolis was short. The florist offered 2 alternatives. My mother called me that evening, not to ask for help, but to tell me about the problem, the way she sometimes did when she was processing something out loud and needed an audience. "The pink ones aren't the same," she said. "Britta's going to be devastated." I said, "Let me look into it." I spent the following morning making calls. I went through 4 wholesale directories and 2 industry contacts before I found a grower outside of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, who had a surplus from an oversupply on a canceled corporate order. The variety was right, same cultivar, same pale blush color, the correct size for the arrangement Britta had shown the florist in the photo she had brought to the initial consultation. The price was $840 for enough to cover the centerpieces and the head table arrangements, which was actually $120 less than the original supplier quote. I called the florist, gave her the grower's contact, and let her make the arrangement. The florist called my mother to let her know the problem was solved. My mother called Britta. Britta called me that afternoon and said, "Mom says you found a flower person?" "A grower in Wisconsin," I said. "It's the right variety." "That's so great," Britta said. She sounded relieved and a little distracted. "You're so good at that stuff." It's the same as sourcing materials, I said. You just need to know where to look. Right, she said. Still. Thank you. There was a brief pause, and I heard voices in the background, a door closing. Is there anything I need to do? To follow up with the florist? Nothing, I said. It's handled. Okay. Another pause. You're coming up the Friday before, right? Mom wants to do dinner. Saturday morning, I said. I have a site review Friday afternoon that I can't move. Oh. She didn't push it. I'll tell her. That stuff. I let it sit there. Then I added the entry to the notebook. Peony Supplier Research and Coordination, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, $840 for hours. The wedding was on a Saturday, the last weekend of July, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Halvorsen was exactly as I remembered it. The gravel road, the pine smell, the light coming through the west windows of the main hall in long amber columns by the time the reception started at 6. There were 140 guests. The string quartet played during the ceremony and for the first hour of the reception. The peonies were right. The linens were the correct shade of pale gold. The seating chart had no gaps. I sat at a table near the back of the main hall with my grandfather Einar, 2 of my mother's cousins, and a woman named Ruth Voss who had been Britta's high school choir teacher. Einar was in a dark suit he had owned for 20 years, and it still fit him well. He had driven himself from Pequot Lakes that morning. He sat with his hands folded on the table and watched the room with the particular stillness of a man who has learned to notice things without drawing attention to the noticing. You did the flowers, he said to me, not long after we sat down. I found the supplier, I said. The florist did the flowers. He looked at the centerpiece on our table. Shirley Temple, he said. Good peony. Hard to source. I looked at him. How do you know that? Ruth's daughter tried to use them for her anniversary party last spring, he said. Couldn't get them. Ended up with something else. He didn't say anything else about it. He picked up his water glass and looked out at the dance floor. Ruth Voss asked me what I did for work, and I told her. She seemed genuinely interested, the way people who actually listen to answers always seems slightly surprising in a room where most people are performing conversation. She asked how long I had been with Lindqvist and whether I had worked on any projects she might recognize. I mentioned the pedestrian bridge over the St. Louis River, a federal infrastructure contract, 18 months from groundbreaking to ribbon cutting, finished last spring. That's yours, she said. My team's, I said. Einar had been listening. He said nothing. He refilled his water glass from the pitcher on the table and turned his eyes toward the dance floor, where Britta and Marcus were beginning the first song. The light from the west windows had gone from amber to the deep gold of late July, the kind that makes everything inside it seem more deliberate than it is. I watched my father at the head table. He was in his charcoal suit, the one he wore to anything he considered significant, and he was leaning in toward Marcus's father with the ease of a man who felt himself to be among people who understood his value. He had shaken my hand when I arrived, briefly, and said I looked well. He had not introduced me to Marcus's parents, who were standing 2 feet away. He had moved on before the pause had quite finished. He had always done this, not with cruelty, exactly, but with the effortless selectivity of a man who had never had to think carefully about who he noticed. It was the same quality that let him accept the money transfers as Nora helping out, without wondering what the helping cost. In his version of events, help that was offered freely and quietly was simply part of the landscape, like weather, like the road. During the salad course, one of my mother's cousins, a woman named Diane who taught elementary school in Bemidji, leaned across the table and asked how the drive down had been. I told her. She asked about Duluth, whether I liked it there, whether I'd been up to Bayfield lately. We talked about the Apostle Islands for a while, the ferry schedules, a trip she'd taken with her husband the previous summer. It was the most sustained conversation I had at the table for the first 2 hours, and I was grateful for it in the way you're grateful for plain food when you haven't eaten. Between the main course and the dessert, Britta came around to the tables to thank people. She reached ours and hugged Ruth Voss and both of my mother's cousins. She stopped beside me and put her hand on my shoulder. I'm glad you're here, she said. Congratulations, I said. It's beautiful. She looked at the centerpiece for a moment. The peonies, pale and full, in the arrangement the florist had built from the Eau Claire stems. They really are right, she said. Then Marcus appeared at her elbow and she moved on, and I turned back to my water glass. Einar, who had observed all of this without appearing to observe anything, reached for the bread basket and said quietly, to no one in particular, "Good flowers." The dinner plates had been cleared and the cake had been cut when my father stood up. He did it without warning, pushed back his chair from the head table, picked up his champagne glass, and tapped the side of it with a knife. The room settled quickly. He had that kind of gravity. People paid attention to Gerald Kessler when he decided to be paid attention to. "I want to say a few words," he said. He spoke for a while about Marcus, about the hardware business, about the kind of man he was glad to be gaining as a son-in-law. He spoke about Britta, her warmth, her steadiness, the way she had always known what she wanted and gone about getting it without making a fuss. He said she was the heart of the family. People nodded. My mother was watching him with the expression she wore when she was proud of him for being good at something she also found slightly exhausting. Then he looked down the room, not quite in my direction but close enough that I felt it, and he raised his glass a little higher. "Everything she has," he said, "came from this family. Everything any of us have came from this family. Don't forget that." He said it pleasantly, the way you say something you mean to land as a compliment. My mother touched his arm. My sister smiled from the head table with her new husband beside her. The room started to applaud, a warm, obliging sound. I kept my face still. I had both hands on the table. I could feel the edge of my thumbnail pressing into the side of my index finger, and I let it press until the applause began to fade, and I needed to bring my hands into my lap. My father started to lower himself back into his chair. That was when Einar Halvorsen set down his water glass, placed both palms flat on our table, and pushed himself to his feet. He did it slowly, the way he did most things, deliberately, without apology for the time it took. He was a tall man, still, even at 78, and when he was standing in a room, he tended to be visible. Several people turned to look. Then several more. My father had almost sat back down. He stopped, half standing, and looked across the room at his father-in-law. "Dad," he said. He said it the way you say a name when you want it to function as a question. "What are you doing?" The room went quiet. Einar reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set something on the table in front of him. A sealed manila envelope, letter-sized, the flap tucked rather than glued. He left his hand resting on top of it. "I'd like to say a few words too," he said. "If that's all right." He didn't look at my father when he said it. He looked at Britta. My father stood fully upright again. Something moved across his face, not quite discomfort, not quite certainty, but something in between that he was working to keep from becoming visible. He set his champagne glass down on the table. "This isn't really the time," he said. "It won't take long," Einar said. The room was very still. 140 people, and the only sounds were the settling of chairs and the distant clatter of the kitchen beyond the service door. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and looked at my grandfather's hand resting on the envelope, and I did not move. Einar didn't sit back down. He stood with one hand still resting on the envelope and looked around the room the way a surveyor looks at a piece of land, taking in the whole of it before settling on any single point. His eyes moved from the head table to the service door to the west windows where the last of the July light was going orange against the pines outside. Then he looked at my father.
"Gerald," he said.
"I've been coming to this family's events for 31 years. I've sat at a lot of tables. I've listened to a lot of toasts." My father said, "Einar." "I'm not finished," Einar said. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without urgency, in a way that made interruption feel structurally impossible. The room held. My mother had her hands in her lap. My sister Britta was watching from the head table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not alarm, exactly, but attention, the way you watch something when you're not sure yet what it is. "You said everything anyone in this family has came from this family," Einar said. "I want to make sure everyone in this room understands what that means. Because I've been watching what it means for about 8 years now, and I think there's been a mistake in the accounting." My father's jaw moved.
He didn't speak.
"Nora," Einar said. "Would you come up here, please?" I didn't move immediately. There was a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, where the sound of my own name in that room felt like something I needed to get my bearings around. Then I pushed back my chair. I walked from the back of the hall toward my grandfather's table. 140 people watched me do it. I kept my eyes on Einar's face and my hands at my sides, and I did not look at my father. I stopped beside my grandfather. He picked up the envelope and held it out to me. I took it. The envelope was sealed with a tuck, not glue. I could feel the contents through the paper, several pages, folded once. In the upper left corner of the front, in my grandfather's handwriting in the blue ballpoint he always used, it said, "You already knew."
Einar.
I stood there holding it. "Open it," he said. I worked the flap open with my thumb. Inside were 4 pages, folded together. I unfolded them. The first page was a table, dates, dollar amounts, a description column. It ran from 8 years ago to 3 months before the wedding. The entries were numbered. There were 41 of them. I recognized most of them immediately. The permit filing for the noise variance, $60. The flower sourcing, $840 credited to the florist, noted in the description as peony supplier, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The venue coordination in the weeks before the wedding, listed as time, not money, but annotated. 11 hours unbilled. Further up the list, a loan to my parents 4 years ago when the roof on their Brainerd house needed replacing, $22,000, interest-free, never repaid, and never discussed again. Further still, the months after my father's early retirement, when his pension lag had created a gap and I had transferred money to my parents' joint account in increments small enough that my mother had described them to her friends as Nora helping out a little. The total at the bottom of the last page was $118,400. Below the total, in my grandfather's handwriting, "This is the direction, Gerald. This is where the money moved." I stood with the pages in my hands, and the room was very quiet. My father said, "Where did you get those numbers?" It wasn't a question. It came out flat, like a statement he had accidentally shaped into a sentence. I said nothing. I kept the pages level and looked at my grandfather. "Nora kept records," Einar said. "She didn't show them to anyone. I asked her about it once, about 2 years ago, and she told me she kept them because she'd been taught that you keep records. She said you taught her that." Something shifted in the room. I heard it more than saw it. A change in the quality of the silence, the way a room full of people adjusts when the center of gravity moves. My mother said, softly, "Gerald." My father looked at her. Then he looked at me. "You should have said something," he said. "You told the whole room," I said, "that everything I have came from this family." I held the pages level. I wanted to make sure everyone understood the direction. He opened his mouth. "You said don't forget that," I said. "I haven't." He closed his mouth. I folded the pages once along the original crease and set them on the table in front of Einar's place. Then I looked at Britta at the head table. She was watching me. Her eyes were bright, and her expression had gone careful in the way that meant she was trying not to show what she was feeling. "Congratulations," I said to her. "The peonies are right." I picked up my clutch from my chair. I walked to the side door of the hall, the one that opened onto the path to the parking area through the pines. I didn't slam it. I pushed it open and stepped through and let it close behind me on its own. The air outside was cooler than the hall. The path through the pines was lit by small solar lights set into the ground on either side, and the gravel was pale in the early dark. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat with the door open and the dome light on and my hands in my lap. I sat there for about 10 minutes. A pair of guests I didn't recognize came down the path talking quietly and went to a car 2 rows over. The kitchen exhaust fan was running somewhere behind the building. Through the trees, I could see the light from the main hall's west windows. My phone was in my clutch. I didn't take it out. After a while, the side door opened again, and Einar came down the path. He walked slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, and stopped beside my open car door. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," I said. He looked at the tree line. "Your mother's going to call you tomorrow." "I know. Your father is going to be quiet for a while," he said. "That's how he processes things he can't correct out loud." I looked at him. "How long have you had those records?" "I built the table," he said. "You gave me the numbers 2 years ago when I asked. You remember. You said you kept them because you'd been trained to." "I remember." "I thought it was possible the moment might come," he said. I didn't know when. Tonight seemed right. I didn't say anything for a moment. The exhaust fan cycled off, and the night went quieter. He believed it, I said. That's what I couldn't figure out. He actually believed it. Ina was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said.
He did.
How does a person believe something that wrong for that long? By not keeping records, Einar said. He said goodnight, touched the roof of my car once with his palm, and walked back up the path toward the hall. I watched him go, the dark shape of him moving through the solar-lit path, unhurried, until the side door opened and closed and the pines absorbed the light again. Then it was just the dark and the sound of the parking lot settling and the faint noise from the hall, muffled now, the way music sounds when walls are between you and it. I sat there for another few minutes. The dome light in my car was still on, and the moths had found it, 2 or 3 of them making slow circles at the edge of the light. Through the trees, I could still see the amber glow of the west windows. Inside, someone had turned the music up. I could hear the bass notes of something with a tempo that meant dancing. I thought about what Einar had said. By not keeping records. It was the kind of sentence that was also a question, and the question it was also asking was whether I was going to spend the next several years being angry about this, or whether I was going to let the table be what it was, evidence presented once, to one room, and then put away. I didn't know the answer yet. I knew I wasn't going to decide it in a parking lot in the dark with moths circling my dome light. I closed the car door. The dome light went out. I sat in the dark for a moment with my hands in my lap, and then I started the engine and pulled out of the lot and drove north toward the highway and the lake. My mother called the next morning at 9:40. I was home in Duluth, at my kitchen table with coffee, watching the light coming off the lake through the east window. I had been awake since 6.
That was a hard night, she said.
Yes, I said. Your father didn't sleep well. I waited. He wants me to tell you, she stopped. Started again. He wants you to know that he didn't realize the amounts. He says he thought it was smaller. It's in the table, I said. Every entry. Every date. She was quiet for a moment.
He wants to talk to you.
When you're ready. Okay, I said. Nora.
She paused.
Why didn't you ever say anything? All those years. I looked at the lake. A freighter was moving along the horizon, slow and dark against the gray water. Because saying it wasn't the point, I said. Contributing was the point. She didn't answer right away. I heard her breathing. I didn't know about most of it, she said finally. The roof loan. Some of the others. I know you didn't. That wasn't fair to you. No, I said. It wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Britta called me this morning. What did she say? She said she didn't know. About the permit. She knew you'd handled it, but she thought the venue had covered the fee. She didn't know about the flowers either, not the full amount. She thought the florist had absorbed the difference. My mother stopped. She was upset. She doesn't need to be, I said. It wasn't about her. She knows that. A pause. She wants to call you. When you're ready for that too. Tell her I'll call her this week, I said. Okay. My mother let out a breath, not a sigh, exactly, but something close to it, the kind that comes at the end of a thing rather than the middle. I'll tell her that. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes, without saying much. At one point she mentioned that Einar had stayed until the end of the reception, that he had driven himself back to Pequot Lakes, that he had said goodnight to her and to my father without making anything of it. The way he always moved through the edges of a situation he had just altered significantly. She said my father hadn't said anything to him. Einar hadn't seemed to expect that he would. Before she hung up she said she would come up to Duluth sometime before fall, just the 2 of us if I wanted. I said I would think about it. She said that was fair. After I set the phone down I sat at the table for a while longer. The freighter had moved past the window's frame. The coffee had gone cold. Outside the lake was flat and gray and very large, the way it always was in the morning before the wind picked up. My grandfather called that evening at 7 o'clock, the way he always did. Well, he said. Another one. I almost laughed. Another one, I said. You sleep all right? Enough, I said.
Good.
A pause. The permit confirmation is still on file with the county, by the way. In case anyone asks. Einar, I said. Just noting it, he said. Surveyors note things. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, the light was changing, the way it does in Duluth in late July, going long and gold across the water.
Thank you, I said.
You did the work, he said. I just kept the table. This story was written and produced by a dedicated creative team working behind the scenes to bring you meaningful, emotionally resonant content every week. This story is fictional and made only for entertainment and educational purposes. All names, events, and details are invented. Nora kept her records because someone had once told her that people who do real work keep real records and that the numbers don't change depending on who's looking at them. That was the only thing that was true.